I'm excited to talk about something that, I totally geek out about if you've listened to this podcast, neuroscience. We're talking about spirituality today. We're talking about how we can blend these two masterful pieces of life together and create healing on a new level. So I'm excited to have you on today. Let's talk. Let's dive right in. We don't even need to worry about any of the formalities. Let's jump in. Who are you? What do you do? And let's get right to it.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Adalina East. I am a trauma specialist and an EMDR specialist. I trained with the United Nations for about 10 years in counseling survivors of trauma. And trauma, I define as anything that shifts and interrupts your life in such a way that is not desirable to you.
Yes.
And it takes a bit of work to get over, but it is possible to get over anything. And I can share this from the very depths of my soul after working with people who've undergone incredible traumas of war, death, abuse, domestic violence, and all of the rest of it.
Yeah.
I also trained as a neuroscientist because I found over time that a lot of the psychological methods that we use in the US are not used in other countries, first of all. And second of all, it is because sometimes the model of talk therapy can be really time consuming, really expensive, and it doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
So I went in search of something that would work for more people in a more rapid way, especially since when you work with the UN, you only get to stay in each place for about 3 years usually. So I wanted to leave people in good shape when I was leaving.
Yes.
And I've always been an intuitive. I was an intuitive as a child as well. And as I kept working with people from different cultures and here in the States, I found that the key to really healing things on a much more rapid scale was to blend neuroscience and psychology and spirituality, because we are all of those things. We are the mind, our emotions, our spirit, and our physical body.
I think what you just said is so fundamental, and many people do not understand. We can talk about trauma and it sits. We talk it to death, right? Maybe it doesn't go anywhere. Then we talk about, okay, here's these tools, but they're really the Band-Aid. We have to blend mind, body, spirit. Let's get a little fundamental for a moment. Let's give the definition of spirituality, because most people have this idea of it's just woo-woo, that's not for me, and they don't quite grasp what spirituality really is.
Danielle, you're asking the hard questions.
I know. That's why you came here.
Leave it to a fellow therapist.
Right.
So for me and for my client base, I work with clients in America mostly, but I also work with clients all over the world.
Right.
Still. And I'm in my own private practice now. I don't work for the United Nations anymore. I went through a very long physical illness that left me pretty incapacitated. And during that time, I had to figure out what else there was out there in the world for me. And I'm still working through a lot of the physical illness part of that. But ultimately, what I've found through my decades of living all over the world is that spirituality can mean anything that is related to your own inner spirit, as well as a power greater than yourself. Now, I think that for a lot of people, they don't believe in a power greater than themselves. And for them, their spirituality is just purely their own intuition, their own spiritual connection to themselves. And that's great.
Right.
And for those that believe in a power greater than themselves and that connection to it, that also works. I don't think that there's any right or wrong in spirituality. That's what defines it, in my opinion, as the difference between spirituality and religion.
I think that was a brilliant way to explain it, because it does take out that religion based or are you, do you believe in X, Y, and Z, but instead this is a very soulful experience. You are a soul inside a physical form. And so we're talking about that today. I want to just put that out there so that It doesn't rub anybody the wrong way, but we can all come to the same definition together.
Yes.
So, how does one, I mean, I think I know, but I want to hear, how does one blend these beautiful elements together, and how can we use that to impact us?
So I love this question because I think I'm always kind of trying to refine how to describe this, because I do think that there are some major tenets of neuroscience in it, but then I think so much of it is about my intuitive connection to the patient that I'm working with, or my intuitive sense of where we need to go in their process. So I only work with people for 6 months at a time, which I realize flies in the face of traditional psychotherapy.
Yeah.
But I know you're similarly, you work with people on a CBT level, which is very different as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think the beauty of what both you and I do actually is that we kind of assess where the person is and where they'd like to get to, rather than talking endlessly about the same 5 things over and over again.
Yes.
So what I begin to do with my neuroscience background is that I figure out where and I don't use the word broken in the sense that anyone is broken. I think no one is broken.
Right.
But where are the missteps in the loops in their brain? So for example, let's say that you are a survivor of 3 really bad breakups in a row, right? So the common denominator here is you.
Right.
Perhaps you're always dating the same person. I've been there. I totally get it.
Yeah.
And some may consider 3 breakups non-traumatic, but that is a major trauma. That's a major life overhaul 3 times. So let's first examine what the loop is in your brain that's bringing you back to this feeling of being broken up with or having this heartache so many times. I usually find that is rooted somewhere in childhood. So I'm going to use a very pat example from therapist to therapist, but let's say there's a woman that I'm working with who had a father who left when she was very young.
Yeah.
She's always falling for men who are avoidant attachment style, where they're not showing up when they say they will, they're not calling, they're not texting, and she just has to kind of take whatever she can get, whatever attention from them she can get. So we would go back to that time in childhood when her dad left the family, and we would implant a new memory.
Right.
People get a little terrified about the word implant, but when I use the word implant, I mean, we create a new story there. So I like to use somatics because that's been really helpful for me in my trauma healing. So we feel what the body feels like at that moment. We only do that one time. We're not going to rehash everything.
Yeah.
Because that's not good for the brain. We bring in the sights, sounds, smells, tastes that were happening at that time, the voices that were around, look at the furniture that was there, whatever else we can come up with. And then using all of those same 5 senses, the same room, the same voices, the same smells, we create a completely new memory.
Yeah.
And that memory is something that is strengthening, empowering, loving. And then we repeat that a number of times. And I use, and this is where the spirituality part comes in, I use specific sounds that I learned early on from my grandmother. She was a Navajo woman. And there are certain sounds that connect deeply to certain neural structures. And of course, this was all just taught to her by the people in her tribe. And later on, neuroscience verified all of this. So I love that. I love it when people are ahead of science.
Yeah.
And we use specific hand motions like mudras and yoga that connect to certain parts of the limbic brain. And then they are given that recording and they take the recording home and they use it 5 or 6 more times. And then I see them again the next week and we tackle a different part of the trauma. And we do that once a week for 6 months or so. And people see incredible changes in their lives. It happens so quickly.
You just described full body healing. I believe that is what is missing in
Mhm.
most traditional offices. It's
Mhm.
something that I believe in. It's something you're talking about, rebuilding a memory, implanting a new memory, something I personally do as well. It is so powerful. In fact, I have chills from head to toe right now. Talking, just seeing someone move through it, seeing the release,
Mhm.
seeing the physical release, and then seeing that expression of just taking that full body. It's
Yeah,
unreal to
it
watch.
is.
It scares a lot of people as they
Mhm.
walk into it. I'm going to talk a little
Yes.
bit about that. Let's take the fear away.
Yes, let's take the fear away. So
Yeah.
I think the first fear is the stigma,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's one of the first things that I work on with my clients because many want to believe that they don't have any trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't, I had a great childhood. My parents were healthy. They loved me. They loved my brother and sister.
Right.
I had the idyllic childhood. Why am I in this place? Maybe you did. I don't know. I wasn't there. But let's also talk about the things you haven't thought about for 20 years,
Right.
because there might be something there. And it's okay if there's something there. It still means your parents are amazing. It still means you had a great childhood. We all have stuff. It's okay. And no
Right.
parent is perfect.
Right.
They're all parenting from where they come from too. Everybody's got their own story. So it's not a blame the parents kind of situation. And I think that's part of the stigma that people come in with feeling really scared of. They're like, I have a great relationship with my parents. I
Yeah.
don't want to mess anything up.
Mm-hmm.
And you
It's
won't.
and you won't
Yeah.
if you so choose, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you so choose. Yeah, it is something that I hear a lot of times, like I know I am holding on to this one thing, or it didn't seem like that big of a deal. Why is it such a big deal now? And because you've created a pattern in your brain. You've
Right.
connected to that moment, and now
Right.
you've told your brain, this is how we're going to handle things. Can we
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about that? Because that is something that is so foreign and I don't think talked about enough. And once the women that I work with understand that, it's like, it's the light bulb. It's the green
It is
check
the light
of,
bulb.
yeah, how do we let that change?
Yeah. So I heard this term on another podcast yesterday, the term neural groove. So we don't
Mm,
actually have neural grooves, but
right.
that's a great way to describe it. So
Yeah.
let's imagine that your brain has highways in it. And let's say you live in Texas, right?
Yes.
So let's say you take the highway from Austin to Houston all the
Mm-hmm.
time. Same
Yeah.
highway, same road, always. It's the
Right.
quickest way, and you have to
Mhm.
travel there once a week or something.
Right.
So you know that road well. You can put on a podcast and listen. You don't even really have to pay attention to the road anymore.
Mhm.
That is what we're doing in our brains. That's what our brains do all day because we do so many things. It
Right.
is very difficult to remain mindful in every single moment of the day. It's very
Mhm.
exhausting. I know
Right.
you teach a lot about mindfulness,
I
so
do.
it's
Yeah.
right up your alley.
It is.
Um, so while we're on this sort of autopilot on the road from Austin to Houston, all these other things are happening around us.
Mhm.
We go to a cafe, we get coffee. Maybe we meet someone in that cafe. We strike up a conversation. That person is interested in becoming our friend. Even though we're not that interested in that person, we give them our card anyway. We make
Right.
plans to have a drink later in the week because that highway from Austin to Houston tells us that we need to collect as many people in our life as possible.
Mhm.
Maybe we have some rejection stuff going on from high school or middle school or whatever. Maybe it's more of a social comfortability thing. We're uncomfortable with being alone
Yeah.
because we were left alone a lot as kids or something along those lines. And then we end up spending our Friday evening, one of our only nights off for us therapists,
Yes.
um, hanging out in a loud, crowded bar when we don't even drink,
Mhm.
having a chat with a new friend. And I'm using quotation marks there because that's the highway. That's the
Right.
highway we know from Austin to Houston. That's what we know. We don't
Mhm.
even notice that we're doing it.
Right.
We barely notice that we weren't interested in that person until we're sitting there in that noisy bar when we don't drink, listening to them
Mhm.
talk.
Right.
And so my job is to help people notice that highway from Austin to Houston. Notice what is
Mhm.
your information superhighway in your brain. What's the thing that you do all the time without even thinking about it? And if that thing is like washing your dishes, great. We don't need to touch that. That's a good one.
Right.
But is that having people in your life that are not meaningful to you? Is that attracting certain types that are not your potential partners? Is that having a negative, impactful relationship with your children? What is that thing for you? And I firmly believe we all have those things. I've been doing this work for 15 years and I still have a couple of things that I'm working on.
I have my hand up. Me too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lifetime journey, right? But it gets so much easier the more we do it.
Yeah.
And so what I love to do with people that I work with is to help them notice that information superhighway and then rewrite it and change it. Part of their homework every week is always to make a log. Make a log of when you find yourself about to travel down that information highway, superhighway, from Austin to Houston, the same old thing that doesn't serve you. Make a list. And at the end of the week, people see like 30 times they almost did it.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing.
And it's amazing when you do those logs like that, where you begin to identify how much this one thing that you did not realize is really showing up so often has greater control than we thought.
Right.
Speaking of the word control.
Oof, oof.
I know. Just that I don't want to touch that right now. It's so fun. It's not funny. Okay, that's not the right word.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me as the longer and longer I've done this, when I see someone who has such a defined superhighway, right? The Austin to Houston thing, where control is one of the biggest issues that they say that they have.
Right.
Can you talk about why that occurs in our brain and then behavior? I can touch you on the behavior part, but why does this happen in our brain?
I absolutely would love to talk about that because it's something that I personally went through about 10 years ago that was so transformational in my life. So I think that when you grow up, and this is what I found not only in my life, but in my clients' lives, when you grow up in a situation where you really have no control, which is most of us, right? Because we're children. There's a new school of parenting now where parents ask their kids, what do you want to wear? And what do you want to eat? And I was just not raised that way. It was we're eating this at this time. Here are your clothes. You're going to school. Bye. You know?
Exactly.
And so I think that along with other things that happen in childhood to many of us, right? Parents get divorced, parents lose jobs, suddenly the finances have changed, you have to change schools. All of these different things are very normal. And I use that in quotation marks, normal,
right,
in childhood, but it can also cause you to feel a lack of control. And you etch in those information superhighways of control really, really firmly when you finally leave the house in college or whatever, because you felt so out of control the whole time. And now you're like, yes, I have this dorm room and the only other person I have to control is my roommate to not make a mess. Or I have this school situation. All I have to do to maintain it is to get straight A's and keep my scholarship. And so you learn how to control as much as you possibly can in your environment, which leads to OCD for many of us.
Right.
And that neural pathway, that information superhighway of control can bring about even more time spent out of control because you're not even noticing all of the other things that are happening around you that are out of your control because you're so obsessed with that one information superhighway, these few things that you can control, that things are happening all around you that you actually could have a real impact on.
Right.
But you're not paying attention to those things. You're dealing with the micro instead of the macro. And so it happens that you just kind of dig yourself deeper into that traumatized hole.
Right.
And I think our most important job is to help teach people how to dig themselves out.
Oh, 100%. I think too, when we're talking about that control, is that so many people spend a lot of time in the emotional response of it all.
Right.
And they don't even realize that, one, we have that superhighway fully active in that moment, and that it's spurring on the thought. And now we're responding to the emotion. People think that they're responding to everything that's happening around them. I'm like, oh, let's get down to
No.
perception. Let's get down to
Yeah.
what's really happening here.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I think that is our greatest job. And when we unlock that, oh, it's like the heavens open up, right? Like, oh,
They
I didn't
do.
even realize.
Yeah. And I think for so many of us too, this is completely true for me. Sometimes I get so busy
Mm-hmm.
doing the business of running a business and seeing clients and taking care of adult things
Mm-hmm.
that I tune out to my emotions. It's like they're sitting next to me.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how I feel about something. And then all of a sudden I'm incredibly nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my signal to be like, whoa, wait a second. I'm having an emotion here that I'm not acknowledging.
Yeah.
There is something here. This is out of my control. But in order for me to feel comfortable with it, I know that I need to acknowledge what this emotion is, feel it completely,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
I
I
think
always
that's a
tell
part of it
women,
too.
oh, 100%. I always tell women, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to sit in it. And they're like, I don't want to sit in it. I'm like, I know, but you have to sit in it. We can't process anything, whether it's a thought or emotion or even an action, until we understand what we're doing. And the reason why you feel the way you do is because you don't understand what you're doing.
Right. It's because that what I heard in the podcast yesterday, neural groove
Right.
is so deeply tread that it's hard to get out of. And don't you think that our society teaches us really young that it's not okay to be uncomfortable?
Oh, 100%. We are told, don't cry.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do about it? And that's so invalidating.
It is. It's terrible.
What do you want me to do about it? How about fix it? Help me fix this. What are you talking about? And that in and of itself creates control later too. I mean, it's all these things, and it can, like you said, be the macro versus micro things that we don't even realize that we're still carrying. And it doesn't have to be these big activating traumas. It can be these small little aggressions that we didn't realize we connected to.
Absolutely. And I actually feel like that can be an even more powerful thing to overcome, because these little micro things add up and get stacked on top of each other. And if they've been invalidated your entire life, like perhaps you were always, telling your friends, telling your therapist, I have this feeling about this. And they were like, oh, everyone has that. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
That actually stacks shame on top of whatever you're feeling. And shame is like the killer, you know?
Yeah. I will often say, you're not alone in that. That happens to everyone. But how you connect to it is the important part, right? Because there is that sense of, I'm not alone, right? Everybody has that feeling. So that makes me, quote, normal, air quotes there.
Right.
However, this doesn't make it feel any better.
Right. Well, that's still validating too. And I think as long as we validate our own emotions, we're in a really good place to start recovering from trauma. It's when we're negating our emotions or pretending that they don't exist that makes it take longer and be more of a struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. So much more resistance to it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about blending neuroscience and spirituality. How can we begin to do that other than hooking up with one of us and starting the therapy work of it? But what tools can really lead us into blending these two for our own lives?
So one of the biggest tips that I usually give people when they're thinking about working with me is to start doing it for themselves in this particular way. So if we're not working together, you won't have these tones from the Navajo people. You won't have all of these different resources. But one thing you can do today, right now, is to notice what your highway from Austin to Houston is. So let's say your big issue in life right now is that you want to become more successful in business. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So is that information superhighway in your brain? Okay, I have to get up at 6 a.m. I have to kill it all day. I can't stop work until 6 p.m. I need to find something to do every minute of that day. And yet I'm not seeing the results. So that sounds like a very punishing information superhighway. And it also sounds like it's not working. So let's look at the feedback that you're receiving from that. It's not positive. So what are some other things that other entrepreneurs do that are working for them? Maybe you could join a social group online. I'm a part of a million to chat with other entrepreneurs about what's working for them. Maybe you can go back in your own history, figure out where you learned that. Where did you learn the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. no breaks thing? And start to just yourself kind of rewrite that. Like if it was one particular traumatic experience as a kid, bring in the sights and sounds and smells of that moment, just for a moment, and then rewrite it in a way that makes you feel good and empowered about taking breaks, about taking time to go out and network instead of just sitting in front of the computer all the time. Although a lot of our networking now is on the computer, but it's still fun.
Yeah, it is.
And then tune into your soul, tune into your intuitive sense. What intuitively feels good to you? If you have a higher power, tune into your higher power.
Right.
And ask for guidance. And those are just things that you can do on your own that are completely free. I also have a couple of free courses on my website too that people can find pretty easily. They can sign up for the newsletter too to learn more.
I love that. It's really interesting. When I was doing my own work, because the truth is, guys, every therapist has their own stuff because we are also humans, right? And so we have to do our own work too. And sometimes things happen to us, or we're sitting with someone and they say something and we're like, oh, okay, we're going to have to write that down for later, right? It comes up, right? Because you've triggered our superhighway at that point. And one of the things for me that I realized was so active in my life was just what you said. We have to go back and look at, why do we have that hustle ingrained in us? My dad was an entrepreneur. My mom did not go to law school until I was well into, I think she finished when I was in high school.
Good for her. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I had that hustle mentality all the time and realized how quickly that would send me into burnout. And yet, even in burnout, I'd still hustle. Right. And so you get sick. You have moments of full stops because the brain says, hey, by the way, this is not happy. This is not good. This is not what your body needs. Not spiritually, not physically, emotionally, mentally, even financially. So it is really interesting how we do get those full stops when we are not aware of what highway or groove is active.
Right. Absolutely. And I think I feel so lucky every day to do what I do, because I feel like not only do we get to work with people to rewrite those highways and to have their lives feel better to them.
Right.
But I don't know about you, but I learned something major and new from every single person I ever work with.
Oh, 5,000%. Yeah. Even if you just learn what doesn't work for someone, you realize, oh, I need to create or come up with or find something else that will allow them to process. And then that way you have a process when something looks similar the next time.
Right.
It's really
and it helps you avoid burnout as well.
Yes, 100%. So where do you find that highway identification gets most people in that broken, stuck phase?
I mean, if we're talking about age ranges, I would say it is all over the map. So, for example, when I first started my practice, I found that I was working with a lot of people in their 20s who were incredibly burned out. And I think that is a sign of the times that we were going through at that point. That was about 6 years ago.
Right.
And people were trying to figure out, okay, my parents had insurance, they had cars, they had a home, and they only worked 40 hours a week. But now I have to have like 2 side hustles to have all of those things.
Right.
I'm exhausted and I'm burned out. However, now, we're still, I don't ever want to say post-pandemic because it rages on in many countries of the world.
Yes.
In our particular country here in the US, we are fortunate enough that it is not as intense. And at this point, I'm finding it to be almost everyone of every age, because the pandemic of loneliness is also real.
Yeah.
And those information superhighways in our brains made us afraid of one another. Throughout the whole thing. And so it's hard to get back out there and to start communicating with people again. When we think about our brains and what's healthy for them, we always have to think about the vagus nerve, which is the 5th cranial nerve. in our brains, and the vagus nerve can be toned through social interaction. It can also be toned through humming, toning, a variety of different things, but its most amazing tone exists when we're being social.
Right.
And so nothing leads to burnout more quickly than sitting alone in your feelings and sitting alone with that feeling of burnout. And so I think that for all of us, really, at this point in time, it's really important to get as social as we can. Sadly, the fifth cranial nerve is not stimulated by online interaction in the same way that it is through in-person interaction. But, you know, in New York during the worst of the pandemic, they set up restaurants outside, literally in the street, under like a rooftop, basically, and people would sit and eat outside under a rooftop in the freezing snow just to have that social connection. And that is an extreme example, but even if you're immunocompromised, which I am, and it's hard to go out and be in groups, still try to do things outside with other people, try to have that social interaction, because nothing will help your burnout more quickly in terms of, not just in my opinion, but in terms of neuroscience, than that social interaction, feeling close to people who understand you and can see your perspective.
Like-minded people, but also not like-minded people, because that challenges us to think in different ways and to be open to new ideas and to connect soulfully and to give our brains something new to focus on, because we do want to build the neuroplasticity. We want to, you know, create new patterns in our brain. I think that's always important. You know, we kind of run in packs to people that will agree with us, or, you know, that we can laugh with and not have deep, meaningful conversations and connections with. We have to have that.
Agreed. And you never know when someone who you previously disagreed with will change your mind. And that's part of being human too, is to learn adaptability. There have been studies done on people in their 60s and 70s who are consistently forced to adapt, sadly, through wartime situations, but they end up having the healthiest brains of everyone that age, because they are able to adapt. They're able to see things from different perspectives, think about things differently, be forced to change their usual routine, that information superhighway method of thinking. And so becoming friends with, or even friendly with, people who have differing opinions to you is so important, because it forces your brain to think differently.
I was just thinking, you know, when that occurs and we connect with people on a different level who don't always identify the same way that we do, in any span, right? Doesn't matter what we're talking about, that we do disrupt those highways a lot of times, because we are forced to really look at it. And sometimes it gives us a new perspective on the highway that we've already identified. Which is also useful. And so let's get back to the neuroscience and spirituality. I love the idea of using sound. I'm a sound therapist myself. I think it's so powerful to see the resonance in the body. What else can we do outside of working with one of us to create some more movement and to create those spaces where we do feel our best?
So there's this man named Porges, and I'm sure you've heard of him. We all, I mean, I can't say we all, I shouldn't say that, but I would say many of the therapists that I love and engage with love Porges' polyvagal theory. So his polyvagal theory basically states that we have this vagus nerve, this fifth cranial nerve, that needs stimulation and toning all the time. And what he found was a series of a few different exercises that you could do to tone this vagus nerve. And what I've found in my research, I'm also a neuroscience researcher. What I've found in my research over time is that there are many different spiritual practices that you can do that will tone your vagus nerve in the same way. So, for example, Porges teaches, or actually, I'm so sorry, I may be misquoting this.
That's okay.
Warning, listeners. There is a polyvagal exercise, we'll just put it that way, where you can put your arms, lay down, put your arms up over your head, and bring your eyes to one side, and look to one side for a solid minute or a minute and a half until you feel a yawn or a sigh coming on. And that's what is called the vagus, and I'm using quotation marks here for the listeners. That's what's called a vagus nerve reset. However, what I've found in my practice is that some toning or some chanting for 1 minute can have the same impact. And let's say that I have my own office space now. I work from my house too.
Yeah.
But when I was working in an office, you can't really lie down and put your arms over your head. So you can go to the restroom or go to a hallway where no one's around and use this tone and take a deep, deep inhale and then tone as long as you possibly can, and do that continuously for about a minute or a minute and a half, and it will have the same impact. So I like to use the ooh or ma sound, but you can also use the voo sound and just hold it for as long as you can. This also ties into breath work really nicely because, we've all read many of us are very interested in yoga and breath work.
Yes.
For the benefits of mental health. And we've found over time that allowing that exhale to be double the length or more than the inhale can also reduce anxiety. So that's another great little life hack to do if you're in the midst of the day.
Yeah, it's also something that is so powerful to break the stress process and anxiety process. So those little breaks in the day, whether it is taking the deep breath and using the tone or, doing the arms above your head and looking to one side, it really does completely reset and rebalance. I talk so much about centering, and people say, well, I can't do it. I'm like, well, we haven't found the right thing for you yet. Every one of us has balance and center. We just have to find how to get there. So I love those activities, and they're quick. It's not 10 minutes. It's not 5 hours. A lot of people
1 minute.
say, like, I don't want to commit to that time. I don't have that much time. I'm like, how often or how long did you stay on Instagram? Well, probably 30 minutes. Okay, well, then you had 1 minute to take a breath. 29
And
minutes?
did that time on Instagram make you feel soothed? Or was that just ramping you up more?
Right. Big conversation around that.
Yeah.
How can we begin to focus on our thoughts, our feelings, what's happening in the superhighway, and connecting it into that spiritual element?
So again, I would go back to this idea of the log, right? So look at what you are on automatic pilot with daily. And one really quick thing that you can do is every time you notice you're about to go into that automatic pilot moment, that information superhighway, that negative self-talk or whatever is going on, instead of taking that minute to beat yourself up, take that minute to tone. Take that minute to get up, step outside, look at the light. Look a little bit below the light for a few minutes. Even if you're in a cold climate, it's worth it to put on your coat and go out there just for a minute. Use those little tiny micro steps to retrain your brain out of that information superhighway. The moment you catch yourself about to write down on your log, yep, I'm talking to myself about how much I hate this again, or about this person who's not good for me again. Stop. Go do something completely different. While you're outside, it's a really great time to meditate if you have a meditation practice, or to tune into your intuition and say, what do I want for the rest of this day? What do I want to feel like for the rest of this day? And what are the little specific tasks that I can do to feel like that?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I'm going to add on in that practice of going outside or standing up or doing whatever it is that you do to break the cycle that's happening, is to add the discovery questions. What was I doing before I started going into the autopilot? What came up for me that brought me into that space in my thought process? And from there, like you said, how do I want to feel? What do I want to do with this thought? Was it necessary for me to go there? Do I even believe what I was telling myself? Because we start then talking about subconscious and conscious thoughts, and that's a 5-hour conversation.
It is. It's a fun one though.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand though that, they'll say, well, I don't even know why I'm thinking that. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, we have to go back to the subconscious, right? And anytime
Mhm.
you get little glimmers of those experiences and those thoughts, it's really your brain telling you, hey, we still have something to address here.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I always ask this question because it's fascinating to me what the answers have been. And it's fascinating to kind of hear someone kind of unravel what they wished the large majority knew. So, what would it be for you? Let me rephrase the question. What would you wish that women knew that they don't have active in their life right now? They may not have active in their life right now.
I wish that women knew that they can truly come back from anything. They can heal from absolutely anything. And I know that may sound Pollyanna and a bit naive, but I have worked all over the world. I've worked with survivors of war and natural disaster devastation and domestic violence, things we cannot here in the US even conceive of living through.
Right.
And I've watched women thrive on the other side of that. And the key to that is retraining your brain out of that traumatic loop and replacing those traumatic loops with new things that motivate you and keep you moving forward. And this can be done at any time. There's no age that's too old and no age that is too young. It is always possible.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because I know a lot of my clients are in their 50s and they're like, I have spent my whole life like this. It's too late.
Never.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're 50 and you possibly have another, say, 30 or 40 years, you almost have equal time. So are you sure you don't have time? And that's always a big eye opener. You can do this work at any time, right? There's no set deadline as to when you begin to change or to heal or to progress.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned some courses and getting into your newsletter. You have a podcast yourself. How can women connect with you?
I have a podcast called the Cosmic Leadership Podcast, where I talk to amazing women like Danielle, and we'll be doing that soon.
Yes, I'm
And
excited.
me too. And you can find my podcast on any podcast platform. I also have a number of digital courses that teach you how to marry neuroscience and spirituality in your own life. I have a course on love, on trauma recovery, a bunch of different topics. And my newsletter goes out once a week and always has a hot tip for the week of how you can start healing on your own, in your own time and space.
Beautiful. And where can we find you on socials?
I'm Adalina East, Adalina East on Instagram, Adalina Healing on Facebook, and my website is adalinaeast.com.
Perfect. So I always end the podcast the same way, and that is to ask, what are your 3 things that you are most grateful for? Or what are 3 things that you have found have been just absolutely life-changing as you've moved through your work?
I am most grateful for my spiritual connection, my friendships, many of which I've had for 30 years or more, and even my new friends that I've made since moving here to New Mexico. And I am most grateful for the chance to serve the world in my unique way.
Beautiful, beautiful 3. I can't thank you enough for your time, for all of the great tools that you've provided to all of the listeners, and just letting us open up a space where we remember that we are soulful beings having a very physical experience.
Thank you so much, Danielle.